You know that feeling when you see a perfectly designed logo that just feels right, or a movie title sequence that immediately pulls you into the story.
Oh, definitely. Or even just browsing a website where everything is exactly where you expect it to be.
Right. You're not just passively seeing things, you're actually processing visual communication all the time.
Absolutely. We interact with visual information constantly. Think about advertising, art, even the layout of a newspaper or the icons on your phone.
It's like this language we all speak intuitively, but we rarely stop to really analyze how it works.
Exactly. And that's precisely what we're diving into today.
We're taking a deep dive into this fascinating world of visual communication, pulling insights from, well, a whole stack of sources curated just for you.
Yeah. And our goal isn't just to, define a bunch of terms. We want to really unpack the core concepts, understand why certain visuals work the way they do.
And highlight the key tools designers use, right? And how it all comes together in the media you see every day.
Exactly. Think of it as understanding the sort of deliberate choices behind all those images that surround us.
Okay, so we've got sources covering a pretty broad spectrum here. Everything from the nuts and bolts of how your eyes and brain actually process light.
Right, all the way to the fundamental building blocks of design itself, different theories explaining why visuals impact us.
And how these principles get applied in, well, everything from classic art to modern web design. It's quite a range.
It really is.
Oh.
We'll start by grounding ourselves in some foundational theories, how we see and interpret things. Then we'll break down the elements and principles the kind of visual language designers use.
And finally, explore how this language is used out there in various media and the actual process behind creating effective visual work.
Sound good?
Sounds great. Okay, let's jump in. So, to start understanding visual communication, maybe we need to think about how communication works more generally. Our sources introduce this transmission model.
Right, yeah. This is a foundational idea. Maybe a bit basic, but a good starting point. It sees communication as this linear process. A source sends a message through a channel to a receiver.
Okay, simple enough. And anything that gets in the way is called noise.
Exactly. So the example given is like your granddaughter calls you on the phone. She's the source. The happy birthday wish is the message. The phone line is the channel.
And the static on the line would be the noise.
Precisely. Or another one, a student talking in class.
Yeah.
The student is the source. What they say is the message. The air is the channel.
And maybe other kids chatting in the background is the noise.
You got it. It's a useful starting point, but, visual communication often feels more complex than just sending a signal down a wire.
Right, because it's so much about how we perceive and interpret those signals, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's where our sources bring in sensory and perceptual models.
Okay, two models, sensory and perceptual.
Yeah. The sensory model focuses more on the physical process, the raw data entering your brain through your senses, how you actually see.
And the perceptual model.
That's more about the active interpretation the viewer does, what your brain does with that data.
So the sensory model is tied closely to how our eyes and brain physically work.
Yes, exactly. It starts with light, which is basically electromagnetic radiation. Our eyes can only see a tiny part of that spectrum, what we call visible light.
Right.
So this light enters your eye, passes through the lens, and hits the retina at the back.
And the retina has those special cells?
Yeah, photoreceptor cells, rods, which are great for low light or night vision, and cones, which handle color and fine detail.
And these rods and cones, they convert the light into something the brain can actually understand, like an electrical signal?
Precisely. They turn that light energy into electrical impulses. These signals then travel along the optic nerve to the visual cortex, which is right at the back of your brain. And that's where this raw information starts getting processed. We perceive different wavelengths and frequencies of light as different colors.
Wow. Okay, so that's the raw input, the sensory part. But the perceptual model, you said that's linked to cognitive theory. That's where our own minds come into play.
Yes, and this is where it gets really interesting, I think. Cognitive theory emphasizes that perception isn't just receiving data, it's an active construction. What you bring to the table really matters.
How so?
Well, several factors influence how you interpret what you see. Take projection, for example. This is when you kind of project your own thoughts or feelings onto a situation or an image.
Like seeing what you want to see or what you feel?
Kind of. The source mentions a manager who's feeling insecure, and they misinterpret a totally innocent comment from a staff member as criticism, purely because of their own internal state.
Okay. That makes sense. What about expectation?
That's another big one. Our preconceived ideas or beliefs can really shape what we see, sometimes even leading to false perceptions.
Like hoping for something specific.
Yeah, the example used is building a huge expectations for a first Valentine's Day based on movies,
Uh-huh.
And then reality doesn't quite match up. Your expectation colored how you perceive the actual event.
Definitely been there. Okay, and selectivity. That sounds important.
Hugely important. We're bombarded with information constantly. Selectivity is how we filter out most of it and focus only on what seems relevant at that moment.
So if you're running late for class,
Exactly. You suddenly notice every single clock you pass. On any other day, you might completely ignore them. Your immediate need makes the clock salient.
and habituation is sort of related to filtering too, right? Ignoring things.
Yeah, it's about tuning out what's familiar or predictable. It's a protective mechanism, really. Stops us from being overwhelmed.
Like getting used to a noisy environment.
Or the source example.
Yeah.
Learning to ignore a school bully once you realize they talk big but won't actually hurt you, you habituate to their threats to conserve your mental energy.
And salience itself, you mentioned that.
Salience is just what stands out to you personally, because it has meaning or relevance in that specific context. If you're starving at a restaurant, guess what becomes salient?
Other people's food.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or if you're focused on status at some fancy event, maybe you notice who arrived in a limo. It's about what matters to you right then.
So our past experiences, our current mood, our goals, they all actively shape how we interpret the visuals around us. It's way more complex than just sender-receiver.
Absolutely. And our sources also mention memory interpreting things based on images we've seen before and culture, those shared understandings of symbols and visuals within a group as other really powerful influences.
Okay, this is fascinating. Moving on, another really fundamental aspect of visual perception, especially for designers, are the Gestalt principles.
Ah, yes, Gestalt, the classic idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Our brains are basically wired to organize visual input into meaningful wholes.
That's automatic, right?
Pretty much. Psychologists like Max Wertheimer, one of the founders, studied how we perceive patterns and group elements together instinctively. Understanding these principles helps designers predict how viewers will make sense of a design.
So what are some key ones?
Well, there's the law of proximity. Simply put, elements that are close to each other are perceived as belonging to a group.
Even if they look different, their closeness connects them.
Often, yes. Proximity can be a very strong grouping cue. Then there's the law of similarity.
Things that look alike go together.
Exactly. Elements that share characteristics like shape or color or size tend to be seen as a group, even if they're spaced apart. Think of a checkerboard pattern.
Okay. And the law of closure. That one always seems a bit like magic.
It does, doesn't it? Our minds want to see completeness. If elements are arranged to suggest a familiar shape, even with gaps, our brain often closes those gaps and perceives the whole form, like seeing a triangle made of just 3 dots at the corners.
Yeah, okay. What about continuity?
The law of continuity. Our eyes tend to follow the smoothest or most logical path. Designers use this all the time, like using a curved line or aligning objects to guide your eye through a composition in a specific direction.
Makes sense. And the last one mentioned is common fate.
The law of common fate. This says that elements moving in the same direction are perceived as a single group.
Like a flock of birds.
Perfect example. Or cars moving together in traffic. In design, you might see this in animation, where related items move together on screen.
So these Gestalt principles really show how our brains actively organize what we see, and designers can sort of tap into that wiring.
Precisely. They leverage these natural tendencies.
Speaking of assembling things to create meaning, especially in film, our sources bring up montage theory.
Ah, montage. Yeah, it literally means assembly or editing. Really pioneered by Russian filmmakers back in the 1920s, most famously Sergei Eisenstein.
Right. Battleship Potemkin and all that.
Right. Exactly. And Soviet montage, specifically, wasn't just about smooth storytelling. It was often about rapid cuts, juxtaposing images that might be unrelated or even conflicting.
To create a new idea or feeling.
Yes, exactly. To create a powerful emotional or intellectual impact through that collision of images. Eisenstein saw it as a way to directly influence the audience's perception and thoughts. Very experimental, quite radical.
And the Kuleshov effect is central to this, isn't it?
Absolutely fundamental. Kuleshov demonstrated that showing one image, then another, makes the viewer automatically assume a relationship between them. The meaning isn't in the individual shots, but in their combination.
So, like, the same actor's neutral face followed by soup implies hunger, but that same face followed by a coffin implies sadness.
Precisely. A plus B, where C is the new meaning created in the viewer's mind. It's powerful stuff.
And there's also something called intellectual montage.
Yeah, that's using the collision of images specifically to spark a new abstract idea in the viewer's mind, something perhaps not literally present in either shot.
And these montage techniques aren't just historical artifacts, right? They're still used.
Oh, absolutely. Alfred Hitchcock was a master of it. Think about the famous shower scene in Psycho.
Right. You don't actually see the knife penetrating skin.
No, it's a rapid montage. The knife flashing, Janet Leigh's reaction, the water, the drain. The combination of those shots creates the intense feeling of brutal violence much more effectively than showing it explicitly might.
It's amazing how meaning gets constructed just by putting images together. Our sources also briefly touch on a couple of other models, the Huxley-Lester model.
Yeah, that one emphasizes the value of studying the whole range of media. Their credo was essentially, the more you see, the more you know. Aldous Huxley and Paul Lester.
And omniphysism sounds newer.
It is, relatively. It means all in balance. It tries to combine the best aspects of earlier theories, really focusing on using all our mental abilities, logic, emotion, intuition, when interpreting visuals.
Okay, so we've got these theories about how we see, perceive, interpret, and how juxtaposition creates meaning. Now let's get practical. Let's look at the tools designers actually work with, the elements of visual design.
Right. These are the fundamental building blocks. Think of them as the vocabulary of the visual language. Understanding them helps you see how designs are constructed.
Starting with the absolute simplest, the dot.
A dot. Seems basic, but it's a complex mark defined by its size and shape. It anchors itself in space, doesn't really suggest direction on its own, but it immediately draws the eye. It's a point of focus.
And if you have several dots close together, that's a cluster.
Yep, a cluster is just a group of dots or other elements in close proximity. And as Gestalt tells us, that proximity creates visual tension and makes them read as a unit.
Okay, next up, the line.
A line is more dynamic. It's defined by length and direction. Lines inherently suggest movement. They also have line weight, which is their thickness.
And lines don't always have to be physically drawn, right? An implied line.
Exactly. Your eye can be led along a path created by the alignment or relationship of other shapes or forms, even if there's no actual line there.
Moving from 2D to 3D, we get form.
Right. Form refers to a three-dimensional object. It's constructed from two or more shapes and possesses depth, the third dimension, and volume, the space it occupies.
Like a cube versus a square.
Perfect. A square is a shape, a cube is a form.
And there are different types of form.
Generally, we talk about geometric forms, things based on math, like spheres, cubes, cones, pyramids, think architecture, electronics, and organic forms, irregular, complex, curvy shapes that simulate natural things like leaves, clouds, rocks.
Okay. And before you get form, you have its 2D foundation, shape.
Exactly. A shape is a two-dimensional area, a plane, with a clear, identifiable boundary. It just has two coordinates, width and height, no depth.
And shapes can vary a lot based on their boundaries.
Sure. You can have rectilinear shapes made with straight lines or curvilinear shapes made with curved lines. The contour of the boundary defines the shape.
Now, the area around all these shapes and forms is space.
Yes, and space is incredibly important. It's not just emptiness, it's the environment, the background. It's defined by the framing, the edges of the design work. How you use space is fundamental to composition.
And the relationship between the object and the space, figure ground.
That's a key concept. The figure is the main object or shape in the foreground, and the ground is the space or background behind it. Being able to distinguish figure from ground is how we perceive depth and separate objects visually. Think of text on a page. The letters are the figure, the page is the ground.
Makes sense. How about texture? Adding a surface feel.
Texture gives a visual sense of how a surface might feel rough, smooth, soft, hard. It's usually created by repeating smaller elements like shapes, lines, or dots at regular intervals. It adds another layer of sensory information, even to a flat image.
Is that different from pattern?
They're related, but different. A pattern is a specific, consistent arrangement of identical or similar elements within a texture. Texture is the overall surface quality. Pattern is often the underlying structure creating that quality.
Okay. And value deals with lightness and darkness.
Exactly. Value is simply the range from light to dark within an image. It's absolutely critical for creating contrast, which helps with readability and making elements distinct. Gradation is a smooth transition between values.
And that fancy Italian term, chiaroscuro.
Ah, chiaroscuro means light-dark. It refers to the use of strong contrasts and subtle gradation of value, often to create a sense of three-dimensional form, drama, and mood. You see it a lot in Renaissance and Baroque painting, but also in photography, in film noir.
Got it. And finally, perhaps the most emotionally charged element, color.
Color is huge. It has physiological and psychological effects, carries deep cultural meanings, and has practical uses too, like in wayfinding systems, using color to help people navigate spaces.
And colors have a temperature, like warm and cool.
Yeah, we talk about color temperature, measured in kelvins. It's a scale describing the warmth or coolness of a light source or color itself. Reds, oranges, yellows are generally seen as warm, blues, greens, violets as cool. Think about light bulbs labeled warm white or cool white. It's color temperature.
And the way colors mix depends on whether it's light or pigment. Additive versus subtractive?
Absolutely crucial distinction. Additive color is what happens when you mix light. Think screens, monitors, TVs, phones. The primary colors are red, green, and blue, RGB. When you add them all together, you get white light.
Okay, RGB for screens.
Then there's subtractive color, which is about mixing pigments, like paint or printing inks. Pigments work by absorbing certain wavelengths of light and reflecting others. The traditional primaries are red, yellow, blue, but in commercial printing, it's cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, key, or CMYK. Mixing these subtracts light, eventually leading to black.
So RGB for light, CMYK for print, makes sense. And what's PMS?
That's the Pantone matching system. It's a standardized system used mainly in printing to specify exact, consistent colors using numbered codes. Ensures that a company's logo looks the same blue no matter where it's printed.
Can we modify basic colors, like making them lighter or darker?
Oh yeah. Adding white to a pure color, hue, creates a tint. Adding gray creates a tone, which makes the color less intense, sort of muted. Adding black creates a shade.
And the color wheel is the tool to see how colors relate.
It's the classic tool. It arranges hues in a circle. The most common version shows 12 colors based on the subtractive model. It helps visualize relationships.
Like analogous colors.
Those are colors that sit next to each other on the wheel, like blue, blue-green, and green. They tend to create harmonious, unified palettes.
And complementary colors.
Those sit directly opposite each other, like red and green or blue and orange. They create the strongest contrast and make each other appear more vibrant when placed side by side. High energy.
And our sources really show these concepts in action. Monet using cool analogous colors for his water lilies.
Right, creating that serene, peaceful feeling. While Van Gogh uses vibrant, often complementary or warm analogous colors for energy and emotion.
You see color strategy everywhere in branding too. Red for energy or hunger, Coca-Cola, McDonald's. Blue often used for trust banks, tech companies.
Absolutely. Even in video games, like the Gran Turismo 5 example, using additive color for realistic lighting or grayscale sections to emphasize form. And think of the Google logo using those bright primary colors playfully.
Okay, so designers have this toolkit. Dot, line, shape, form, space, texture, value, color, powerful stuff. But just having the tools isn't enough. How do they arrange them effectively? That brings us to the principles of visual design.
Exactly. The principles are like the grammar or the rules for using the elements. They guide how the elements are composed to create an effective, impactful piece.
And the main goal often is unity.
Unity is key. It's about bringing all the disparate elements together so the design feels like a cohesive whole, like everything belongs and works together. You could say achieving unity is often the main goal, and it happens when the other principles are applied well.
Okay. What about balance?
Balance provides a sense of visual equilibrium in the composition. It's about distributing the visual weight of elements, how much they attract the eye, based on things like size, color, texture, position.
And there are different kinds of balance.
Two main types. Symmetrical balance is formal. Stable elements are mirrored pretty much exactly on either side of a central axis. Think of the human face.
And the other.
Asymmetrical balance. This feels more dynamic, more modern sometimes. Elements are balanced using different visual weights on either side of an off-center axis. A large, light-colored shape might be balanced by a small, dark shape. It can create more visual tension and interest.
Okay. Scale is simply about size.
Yes, the literal size of an element. Changing scale drastically changes perception, makes things seem important, or distant, or powerful.
And it works closely with proportion, right?
Hand in hand. Proportions is about the relative size of elements compared to each other, or to the whole design. Seeing a tiny person next to a huge tree helps us understand the proportion and therefore the scale of the tree. The golden section is a specific classical proportion thought to be inherently pleasing.
Contrast seems really fundamental for making things clear.
It is. Contrast occurs when two elements are noticeably different, light versus dark, big versus small, smooth versus rough, warm color versus cool color. High contrast grabs attention and improves readability. Black text on white background is high contrast. Low contrast is more subtle. Contrast helps create focal points.
Proximity, we touched on this with Gestalt. It's about closeness.
Exactly. How close or far apart elements are. Placing related items close together helps the viewer understand they belong together and process the information logically. Think about how contact info is grouped on a business card.
And rhythm, how does that work visually?
Rhythm creates a sense of movement and pattern through the repetition of elements, like a visual beat. Repeating shapes, lines, or colors in a sequence can guide the viewer's eye and create a sense of flow or energy. Think of repeating columns in architecture.
And applying these principles effectively leads to emphasis.
Yes, emphasis is about creating a focal point, the most important element or area that the viewer's eye is drawn to first. Designers create emphasis using contrast, scale, isolation, color, placement, basically, making something stand out from its surroundings.
Like in Hopper's Nighthawks.
Good example. The bright light of the diner contrasts with the dark street, and the figures are grouped together through proximity, drawing your eye right into that scene. The principles all work together.
It really becomes clear when you look at famous artworks, as the sources describe. Value in the Mona Lisa, the chaos created by proximity and contrast in Picasso's Guernica.
They're not just random choices. They're deliberate applications of these principles to achieve an effect.
Okay, let's switch gears slightly and talk about a specific element that's incredibly important in design. Typography, the design of text.
Type, yes. Absolutely fundamental. Every character, whether uppercase or lowercase, has a visual design. A whole collection of related designs is called a type family, like Helvetica Neue. A specific style within that family, like Helvetica Neue bold condensed, is a typeface.
And the big basic distinction everyone knows is serif versus sans serif.
That's the main one. Serifs are those little strokes or feet at the ends of the main strokes of letters, often associated with tradition, readability, and long texts. See, serif literally means without serifs. These typefaces look cleaner, more modern to many people, often used for headlines or digital text.
Our sources briefly mention some historical classifications too, old style, modern, slab serif, showing how type has evolved.
Yeah, tracking changes in things like contrast between thick and thin strokes, the shape of the serifs, overall width. And beyond serif sans serif, you have other type styles like italic, slanted, script, looks like handwriting, or decorative fonts, which are very stylized, often for specific uses like logos or headlines.
Like those fancy initial capital letters you see sometimes.
Exactly, that's a classic decorative element.
How is type actually measured?
In the design world, especially digital, we use points to measure the height of type technically, from the bottom of the lowest descender to the top of the highest descender. Line length is often measured in picas.
Okay, and there are specific parts of a letter form. Base line, mean line.
Right, the baseline is the invisible line the letters sit on. The mean line marks the top of most lowercase letters like X, AA. The distance between the baseline and mean line is the X height, which really affects how large a typeface looks.
And parts that go above or below.
Parts extending above the mean line are ascenders, like in H or B. Parts extending below the baseline are descenders, like in P or G. And typefaces also vary in weight, light, regular, bold, and width, condensed, extended.
Designers use type specimens to see all this.
Yeah, a type specimen sheet shows off the typeface in different sizes, weights, contexts. It helps a designer choose the right font and see how it will look and feel in their design. Type can even be the main visual element, like in some posters or graphic designs.
And managing type is a huge part of desktop publishing.
For sure. That whole process of combining text, photos, graphics into a layout for print or web using software, it gave us things like WSIWGG. What you see is what you get, trying to make the screen match the final output.
Let's talk about arranging type on the page. Type alignment.
Okay. Alignment is how lines of text are arranged relative to the margins, the space around the content. A spread is two facing pages. Text can be centered, justified, aligned evenly on both left and right edges, flush left, aligned left, ragged on the right, or flush right, aligned right, ragged left.
And the alignment affects the feel.
Definitely. Centered and justified often feel more formal, traditional. Flush left is generally considered the most readable for Western languages. Flush right is used more for specific effects. The rag, that uneven edge, gives it a more informal feel.
What about the spacing between letters and lines?
Crucial for readability. Leading, pronounced letting, is a vertical space between lines of text, measured baseline to baseline. Kerning is adjusting the space between specific pairs of letters so they fit together nicely, like A and V. Tracking is adjusting the overall spacing across a whole word or block of text.
Get those wrong and it looks awful or is hard to read.
Exactly. Good spacing is invisible. Bad spacing is glaring.
And all these choices contribute to the overall page layout.
Right. Layout is the art of arranging all the elements, text, images, space on the page or screen. We already mentioned spreads. Other terms include bleed, where an image extends right off the edge of the page.
It's trimmed off later.
Right. Columns are vertical blocks for text. The space between columns is the alley. The space between facing pages in a spread is the gutter.
And designers often use a grid to structure the layout.
Yes, a grid is an underlying structure of columns and rows that helps organize elements consistently. Think of it like scaffolding. Designers like Mueller, Brockman, and Vignelli were famous proponents of grid systems for creating clear, unified designs. A module is a basic unit within the grid.
Our sources mention different layout styles too.
Yeah, some classic approaches, like Mondrian style, dividing the page into geometric blocks. Picture window, where one large photo dominates. Silhouette, where elements are cut out against a background. Or even rebus, using pictures within text.
You really see these layout principles in magazines, book covers, movie posters, like the Vanity Fair cover using type hierarchy, or the Looper poster using centered alignment and scale.
Absolutely. Typography isn't just about conveying words, it's a powerful visual element in its own right.
Okay, so we've covered the theories, the elements, the principles, including type. How does a designer actually put all this together in a real project? Let's talk about the creative process and how visual communication gets applied.
Right, the process. It's usually not just random inspiration. There's typically a structured approach. Our sources outline it generally as research, plan, ideation, refinement, and production, though it's often more cyclical than linear.
Makes sense to start with research. You need to know what you're dealing with.
Absolutely essential. Gathering information is step one. This involves market research, who's the competition, who are the potential customers, visual audits, how is the brand currently perceived, looking at the industry, how have others tackled similar problems.
And really understanding the audience through demographics.
Crucial. You need to know who you're talking to. The Siska Umi ad example was good. They researched young males' interests, like video games, to make the ad resonate. Research also means understanding the project's technical specs or constraints, like a website needing to avoid Flash.
So, after gathering all that info, you plan.
Planning sets the direction. What's the core message we need to convey? What's the scope of the project budget, timeline, deliverables? What's the overall strategy, and what's the intended result? This often gets formalized in a design brief.
Okay, brief in hand. Then it's time for ideation, generating ideas.
This is the brainstorming part, turning the strategy and research into actual visual concepts. Techniques like mind mapping, using sticky notes to cluster ideas, or doing lots of quick thumbnail drawings can help explore possibilities.
Get lots of ideas out there, then narrow it down through refinement.
Exactly. Refinement is about taking the promising concepts and simplifying, improving, and honing them to make sure they really hit the goals defined in the plan. It involves making adjustments, maybe realizing something isn't working.
Like that Samsung S3 ad example, where repositioning the phones made the message clearer.
Perfect example of refinement in action. And this stage almost always involves collaboration, working with the client, maybe a copywriter for the text, other team members. You might build a prototype here, a test version.
Which naturally leads into presentation and getting feedback through critique.
Right. You need to present your refined work, usually explaining your rationale, how the design choices address the brief. Then comes critique, or crit. It's ideally a collaborative session to describe, analyze, interpret, and evaluate the work constructively.
Not just saying I like it or I don't like it.
No, much deeper. A facilitator might use leading questions to spark discussion. What works? What doesn't? Why? Does it communicate the planned message effectively? Does it reach the target audience? Analyzing strengths and weaknesses.
And the point is to figure out how to make it better, strategizing to improve.
Yes, the critique should lead to actionable feedback. This really highlights the circular process of design. You research, plan, ideate, refine, present, get critiqued, then you go back and refine some more based on that feedback. You iterate until the piece is strong enough for production.
And this whole process, applying all those theories and principles, is what results in the visual communication we see everywhere, like in advertising.
Right. Advertising is all about using visual design and words to sell something. You see it in ad campaigns with a consistent theme, often using integrated marketing communications, IMC, so the message is unified across different platforms. It's always aimed at a specific target audience identified through demographics.
And trying to highlight a unique selling proposition, USP.
Often, yeah. What makes this product different or special? or sometimes selling an ideal, like the Tom's Shoes example. And copywriting, crafting the text, is a key part of the visual design, too.
Then there's public relations, PR, which is related but different.
PR manages the broader communication between an organization and the public. They also use integrated campaigns. Visuals are key in crisis management, trying to reshape a negative image, often through carefully designed campaigns.
Our sources also mention spin.
Yes, spin is presented as a technique, often political, that pushes a particular viewpoint, usually by framing information selectively or emphasizing one side. Examples given include certain political ads or that Centrum ad using older survey data to imply current benefits.
Which sounds related to propaganda.
Propaganda is generally defined as a more systematic, controlled dissemination of messages, often symbolic and one-sided, specifically designed to shape attitudes and actions on a large scale. Design has been a powerful tool for propaganda throughout history. Think WW2 posters, stereotyping, relentless repetition of symbols and slogans.
Companies also manage their image through corporate branding.
Definitely. Building brand recognition so people instantly know who you are. Developing a corporate identity, the visual personality and culture. This is often documented in a corporate identity manual specifying logo use, colors, fonts. Over time, this can lead to an iconic symbol.
What about visuals that move, motion graphic design?
Yeah, applying design elements and principles over time. A classic example is the title sequence for films or TV shows. Saul Bass was a pioneer here, showing that titles could be more than just text. They could set the mood, introduce themes. Sound, editing, and especially timing are crucial in motion graphics.
And turning data into visuals, infographics.
Infographics aim to present information or data clearly and visually. From simple pie charts to complex interactive visualizations. Edward Tufte, a major figure here, famously said, "There's no such thing as information overload, just bad design, pushing for clarity and efficiency."
There are different types.
Yeah, like thematic graphics using color or shape on maps, for instance, or referent graphics using icons to represent things, like the icons for restrooms or bus stops on Google Maps.
And of course, design for print, publication design.
That covers layout and graphic design for books, magazines, comics, newspapers. It requires understanding the specific publication type. Magazines need strong editorial layouts. Comics rely on sequential panels integrating words and images. E-publishing adapts these principles for digital formats.
Finally, the massive area of web design.
Building websites. Technically, it involves HTML for the structure and content, and CSS for the styling and layout. They work together. Key goals often include good interactive design, making things clickable, responsive, and optimized design, ensuring the site loads quickly and works efficiently.
Wow. Okay, that really covers a huge amount of ground.
It really does. We've sort of journeyed from the very basic theories of how we perceive visual information, how our brains make sense of it all.
Right, through the Gestalt principles, montage.
To the actual elements like color and line, and the principles like balance and contrast that designers use as their toolkit.
And then through the design process itself, from research to critique.
And finally, seeing how it all comes together in the real world. In advertising, branding, film, infographics, web design, all that stuff.
And I think understanding these concepts isn't just, for designers or art students. It really gives you a kind of literacy for navigating the world around you, which is just saturated with visual messages.
Absolutely. It helps you look beyond just the surface level and start to recognize the deliberate choices being made. Choices designed to inform you, persuade you, evoke emotion, guide your eye.
So now, armed with this knowledge, maybe the next time you see an ad or a logo or watch a movie's opening credits or even just browse a website, you might see it differently.
Hopefully. You might start recognizing the use of complementary colors for impact, or how proximity groups information, or why a certain typeface was chosen. You see the construction behind the image.
So here's something to think about. What visual cue did you encounter today? Maybe a logo you see all the time, a news graphic, perhaps a photo online that you might have previously just glossed over, but now, thinking about it, you can recognize as a carefully constructed message. A message designed, perhaps subtly, to shape your perception in a specific way.
Keep observing, keep asking questions. There's always more to see.